30 years ago, Dinesh D'Souza wrote a book called Illiberal Education. It described in lurid detail how on college campuses the American left had gone from championing free speech to stifling it. Conservatism under Reagan had become a potent force, a liberating, optimistic, and patriotic alternative to the malaise and pessimism of the 1970s. The faculty and the administration of campuses became dominated by liberals who were desperate to turn young minds away from Reaganism and the America he represented, which these activists maintained, let's face it, as inherently racist and sexist because its founders were privileged white men. Conservatives challenging the liberal orthodoxy on campus were sued, maligned, and they were maligned by students and professors alike. They were subject to disciplinary action and even physically threatened. The ultimate goal was to bully them into silence. Of course, that effort failed. Conservatives probably now see how naive it was to believe that this squelching of free speech would end once they left campus. Instead, the left's propaganda shaped a new generation of young adults who then parroted all that malarkey about the patriarchy, and then they came up with their own new phrases like microaggressions and safe spaces and white privilege. Today, left-wing activists use these terms as bludgeons to intimidate those who disagree with them from entering the dialogue at all. So for all their talk of inclusion, the left doesn't invite more voices to enter the public discussion. Instead, they drive out any dissenting voice and police the dogma of their own creation. Generations later, the chilling effect on free speech in the workplace, in the media, and in society at large is palpable. We all feel it. And the situation may be worsening. A Brookings Institution survey was released last fall of college students' attitudes toward free speech on campus was really depressing. The researchers asked, do you agree with shouting down a controversial speaker who comes to campus? 51% of respondents said yes. And Democrats were far more likely than Republicans to agree with stifling free speech on campus, 62 to 38%. And by the way, women were more likely than men to believe that so-called hate speech is not constitutionally protected. The numbers were 49 to 38%. And by the way, other data indicate that hostility to free expression is starting even earlier than college, meaning these kids are picking it up either at home or in high school, junior high, or in both places. This, too, is super disheartening. It is critical that all of us, regardless of where we fall on the ideological spectrum, recognize the perilous road that we're on. Think about it. If 40 to 50% of the country feels like their right to free expression is less worthy of protection than that of any garden variety leftist, where does that leave our First Amendment? As a shell of its former self is the answer. There is a contraction of free speech all around us, and few seem to even notice. Many of you have become accustomed to editing yourselves, let's face it. Expressing views that just 5 or 10 years ago were considered mainstream can now get you fired. It can cause you to lose a promotion, or you could be branded a hater, or yes, you can get boycotted. Sadly, with people like Christopher Hitchens and Nat Hentoff gone, there are only a handful of true liberals left on the scene to defend the vigorous exchange of ideas.
I have been the victim of a boycott of sponsors. I lost a job once. It is wrong. You shouldn't do this by teams. It is the modern way of cutting off free speech.
And the goalposts, by the way, are forever moving. Every day, more issues are taken off the table altogether and may no longer be debated at all. So, in other words, if you're against affirmative action, you're a racist. And if you wear a Make America Great Again hat to a gun control rally and get beaten up, well, don't expect a lot of sympathy from the attendees. And if you praise the military skill of Robert E. Lee, You're liable to be branded a defender of slavery in the New York Times. Remember what happened during the campaign when some left-wing nutcases in San Jose got their hands on a Trump supporter? This is the intolerant left in action. Whether it's striking voices from social media or driving certain viewpoints from the airwaves, beating people up, organizing boycotts for perceived unforgivable offenses, or preventing speakers from being heard on a college campus, it's all coming from the same place. A desperate desire to stop debate by branding your opponent unacceptable and driving him or her from the public square. In just the past week, while I was on my Easter break, we saw more examples of the totalitarian agenda in action. Popular black conservatives, Diamond and Silk, noticed that their Facebook fans weren't receiving notifications of the new content that they were posting. For months, they begged Facebook for answers. Well, on Thursday, Facebook officially informed them, quote, "The policy team has come to the conclusion that your content and your brand has been determined unsafe to the community." Well, they say they were never informed about how their videos or brand were unsafe for their community, or even what the community is. But their fans are still not receiving notifications, and Facebook says there's no appeal. It feels like we're all again in college, that the speech police demand that you change your focus, change your tone, change the subject, or else. Then there was conservative writer Kevin Williamson, formerly a never-Trumper at National Review. He was hired in March by The Atlantic to great fanfare. Well, that all changed last Wednesday when the Soros-funded Media Matters dug up an old podcast where Williamson described abortion as homicide, and he suggested that it should be treated like any other crime, up to and including hanging. Well, that's pretty rough stuff, but so is abortion. The Atlantic editor, Jeffrey Goldberg, announced that they were parting ways with Williamson because, quote, "the language used in the podcast was callous and violent. This runs contrary to the Atlantic's tradition of respectful, well-reasoned debate and to the values of our workplace." Of course, millions of Americans believe that abortion itself is callous and violent, most obviously to the innocent life it destroys. Nevertheless, another non-liberal voice was snuffed out at yet another esteemed publication. My friends, something alarming is taking place. The free speech clause of our Constitution doesn't just apply to speech that the elites deem acceptable. It exists to support speech that is, by its nature, offensive. Offensive to people in power, offensive at times to lawmakers, offensive to Facebook, and even offensive to the cool crowd that thinks abortion is just a sacred right, and that Trump himself is a dangerous dictator. We indeed are reaching a crisis point where cultural walls are now being erected to conscript and still free speech in America. But we cannot let this continue. At the end of tonight's show, I'm going to be announcing my response to this dangerous epidemic and what this show will do in the coming weeks to expose the perpetrators, their tactics, their major players, and their funders. Their efforts are Stalinist, pure and simple. Their objective is a total transformation of American society, not through rational discourse and open debate, but through personal demonization and silencing. True liberals and conservatives should defend the freedom of speech anywhere and everywhere, because the tables can turn very quickly. Today, it's conservatives being targeted, but tomorrow, it could be left-of-center voices as well. I say, let the debate continue. What the speech czars don't seem to appreciate is that there are as many, or if not more, of us than there are of them. And we will never relent. And we will never give in. Never. And that's the angle. Joining us now.